Welcome to the 1871 podcast, and today is the 40th anniversary of the announcement that Reading were going to be merged with Oxford United. So can you imagine that now, Reading fans? But yes, that really happened back in 1983, April the 16th, 1983. News came out that Reading were going to be merged with Oxford United. So what we're doing is we're bringing you a special 1871 podcast episode today, looking back on what happened in April 1983 and how the proposed merger was blocked. And as well as my co-host Johnny Hunt, we're also joined by some Reading fans who remember what happened all those years ago. So a very warm welcome to John Keane, Keith Harbour, Rodney Pitt and Ewan Carr. So thank you to all of you for joining us. And Ewan has stood in before as a co-host. So welcome back to you, Ewan. Now, before we start, I thought it was worth putting this into perspective. Because firstly, I think it's important to say that this wasn't just an idea. It was announced that it was actually going ahead. So as I say, imagine how you'd feel now as a Reading fan if it was announced that Reading were going to be merged with Oxford United or Swindon or whoever. Just take a moment to think about how that would feel, you know, if there was a real danger that was going ahead, because that's what happened back in 1983. That news came out, Reading will be merged with Oxford United. So just for those of you particularly who don't know the story, here's how it transpired. So 40 years ago today, on Saturday, 16th of April, 1983, it was announced that Reading chairman Frank Waller had negotiated a deal with Robert Maxwell and that Reading would be merged with Oxford United to create a new club called Thames Valley Royals, and the team would play their home games at Didcot. So 3 members of the Reading board, Colin Brooks, Roy Tranter and Richard Cox, they immediately opposed the merger, and they enlisted the help of former Reading player Roger Smee to stop the merger from happening. And my dad, Brian Roach, was also involved. He headed up a media campaign to gain support for Roger Smee's bid to block the merger. And there were fan protests. Roger Smee's legal team discovered that Maxwell had bought shares from Frank Waller illegally. So the merger was successfully blocked eventually. Roger Smee became Reading chairman. My dad became a Reading director. And then the rest, as I say, is history. But let's imagine for 1 minute what impact that would have had on Reading Football Club if the merger had gone ahead. So first of all, very simply, Reading FC would have been no more. So there wouldn't have been the record-breaking Royal season in the 80s, no Simor Cup final win at Wembley, no promotion season in the 90s, no Jamie Curitan goal at Brentford to secure automatic promotion, no 106 season, and Reading wouldn't have had 3 seasons in the Premier League. And in fact, Reading's last success, if the merger had gone ahead, would have been the Division 4 title in 1979. And our final memory of Reading before the merger would have been the Royals being relegated back to Division 4 despite Kerry Dixon scoring 32 goals that season. And who knows, maybe this would be the Thames Valley Royals 1983 podcast. But, you know, we'll never know. So might be the 40th anniversary of the new club, but safe to say we're all pleased that didn't happen. And it's fair to say the Oxford United fans are as well, even though they're not doing as well as we are, although not doing that well, but we're still in the Championship. So
don't jinx it.
Yeah, let's go back to April the 16th, 1983. Reading were at home to Gillingham, and the news came out about the merger. And Johnny, I think you must have been about 5 or 6 back then, so I'm guessing you don't really sort of remember too much about that day, but you've sort of heard a lot about it, haven't you?
I take that as a compliment, Mark. Thanks very much, but I was actually 11.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right.
No, I was living down in Dorset, and I do remember, like, you know, in those days we just had newspapers, and TV, and that was it. But I do remember it, and I remember it being in the back pages about what was going on, and obviously, from a family that lives there, and it was like, what, like, no, you can't, you just can't, you can't do that. That's our club, and for anyone. And I remember the uproar about it, but it was actually frightening because it was really close. When it gets talked about in like it's going to happen, you don't have the social media streams of constant updates every 2 seconds about what's going on in the world as you do now. It was a really horrible fear that is going to happen. And how long it hung over for, I can't remember, but it was pretty horrific.
Yeah.
Because my parents, my grandparents, being Reading fans, the Reading fans are not supporting that other lot down the road. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, not just supporting them, but joining force with them. So, John, I'll come to you now. How did it make you feel, when you first heard the news about the proposed merger? Was it shock or what were you thinking?
I mean, it was strange because I don't remember the game because it was a 0-0 with 2,800 people there, and it was just drab and instantly forgettable, and nothing at all was mentioned at the game. Got home to Wokingham. Those were the days when you could get away quickly. I was back at Wokingham in time for the 6 o'clock news, and that led with a picture of Robert Maxwell and Elm Park, and I've step back and have a look, turn the sound up, and then just sheer disbelief. And as Johnny says, it was not that it might happen, it was just presented as a fait accompli. It was all going to happen, and it was just wow. Really, this was the first time ever that it became relevant who the chairman was. In the past, they were just a shadowy figure in the background, and nobody ever discussed football finance. Nobody discussed who owned clubs. Then suddenly it was just at the forefront of the whole club's existence.
Yeah, and I would like to come to you now, Keith. What about you? What were your thoughts when you found out about the merger? And can you remember where you were when you heard the news? And I just want to say, there's a bit of background noise. So if whoever's hasn't got their mute on, could you turn your mute on, please? So because we're hearing a bit of background noise. So thank you for that. So yeah, Keith, how about you? Can you remember where you were when you heard the news, and what did you think? Keith, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I volunteered in the supporters club shop behind the Tyler's goal for years at Elm Park. So obviously, I think I was probably down there when I heard about it. But obviously, it was an absolutely disastrous thought. Losing Reading Football Club, and an instant hatred of Robert Maxwell, really. But no, I mean, my first thought, when they said about having a march and everything, I thought, well, we need a banner, and that's why I made a banner for the march. But yeah, I mean, I can't honestly remember exactly where I was at the time, but I think it must have been at the ground, because we used to get down at 12 o'clock before the game to set the shop up, and we were there long after everybody else had gone. Yeah, I mean, that's all I can remember about when I actually heard about it.
Yeah, and Rodney, I'll come to you now. Just want to ask you what your thoughts were when you heard the news about this proposed merger with Oxford United.
It was very sad and very strange. I mean, my family had supported Reading since 1900. My grandfather was born in Reading, which is how, despite the fact that I live in the West Midlands, I've always been a Reading supporter. And I was at that game with my father. My grandfather passed on a few years before. And we weren't aware of anything really until we got home and heard the football scores. And then David Coleman saying this was going to happen. It was a foregone conclusion. And it was only thanks to Tranter and to Roger Smee, and the fact that Roy Tranter gave Roger the access to the documents and the accounts. They were able to find out that Maxwell and Co had issued themselves with extra shares, because at that stage they only had 40%, and they gave themselves another 19% to take it over the point. And I mean, at that time, Oxford were riding fifth in the division. Reading were fighting against relegation, and there we go again. And we were there, and ultimately went down that season, despite Kevin's scores and everything, you know. And it just didn't seem real being there and knowing and hearing about what was going on. And you know, here we are. We've been supporting the family for all those years, the team for all those years. And despite me having moved around the country, we still kept going to the matches. And it was very, very hard to get your head around. And how could somebody as poisonous as Maxwell kill off possibly the club that I'd always loved? And it was heartbreaking. You know, Oxford City Council were trying to offer all sorts of sweeteners to Maxwell to stay in the city. Another mayor had offered Reading the chance, or the new venture, to go there. And it was all up in the air. And here we were, about 5 games from the end of the season, and not knowing whether we were going to have a club for the next season. You know, it's looking back now, it just seems desperately hard to imagine what was going on and what was in the mind, because we'd always had a respect for the directors of the club up until that moment. And then suddenly Frank Waller threw his lot in with Maxwell, and the whole thing sort of ground to halt and was facing a big abyss.
Yeah. And Ewan, I'll come to you now. Yeah, I think you were quite young back in 1983, weren't you? But you lived very close to Elm Park. I know that. You know, what were your thoughts when you found out? Can you remember?
Yeah, just about. I can remember. It was 40 years ago, obviously, and that's coming up quite soon. So, yeah, I remember similar. It must have come up on the news, and so I went up and got the Sports Post at Wantage Road Post Office, which, you know, back in those days, it would be printed by about 5:20 on a Saturday afternoon, and you'd get all the scores plus a little bit of the report of the game. But this time it had the Oxford and Reading to merge on the front, you know, and it was like, that's never going to happen. But in my, you know, 40-year-old brain, giving my age away. And the reason I thought it was never going to happen was a couple of years beforehand, George Best, we were going to sign George Best, and it was on the front page of the Evening Post. So I thought, similar, this is just, you know, rumour. But then come Monday, it was on TVS. Maurice Evans was interviewed on the Norfolk Road, you know, where we used to play football and things like that. And it was used as a car park after the games. And he was interviewed, and it seemed to, this is real, this is, you know, proper. And I'd never really heard much of Robert Maxwell at the time, being that age, no interest in mergers and acquisitions or business speak at that time, you know. So why was he doing this? This was the question. What's in it for him? And, you know, if you think about it, if he had the money, he could have started up a football club separate from Reading and Oxford. What was his rationale? It's probably just he was ingrained with, if you merge 2 football clubs together, it's going to be a bigger, you know, business. It's going to make more money. And it was the start of things. He could see that going forward, and he took over Derby, didn't he, after Oxford? But it was a massive change for Reading, and it just demoralised things for a while. And I think, you know, it was interesting how it all span out, because if, you know, your dad and Roger Smee and everyone hadn't got together, and if everyone had reacted that this is just, you know, bananas, this isn't going to happen, and just sat back and wait for it, you know, we might not have had a Reading Football Club. But because of the guys who did get together and took this seriously and thought Maxwell's for real, then, you know, it ended up that it never did happen. And it probably would never happen because of the, you know, Oxford fans that had just been, you know, protest upon protests in hindsight. But the club had to regroup and get together and get new funding as well, didn't they? So it must have been interesting times at that time. I don't know how you remember it, how it was going on in your life, Mark.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, when you were talking there, Ewan, and I was thinking, I seem to recall that one of the rumours going around why Robert Maxwell wanted to do this was that he basically wanted to make sure that this new team had Kerry Dixon because of all he's got. Even though Reading went down that season, Kerry Dixon scored however many goals it was, 22 or something like that, I think it was that season. So yeah, that's kind of my recollection. I don't really remember it happening because I'll hold my hands up. It was just before I became a Reading fan, really. And just on that point, coming to you now, John, Ewan said he took it with a bit of a pinch of salt. Did you think it was actually going ahead, or did you think it could be stopped?
I mean, I didn't know anyway that it could be stopped, to be honest. And I don't know how much of this is hindsight. I'm not sure how much I felt of this at the time, but I think part of it was that Maxwell was playing a game of brinkmanship with Oxford City Council because he tried to find so many sites for a new ground to replace the manor ground for Oxford, and I think he was doing a power play and saying, okay, well, if you won't find me a site, I'll go somewhere else. And Reading was just really collateral damage in that. So if Oxford City Council had given him a site to keep Oxford in the city, he may well have just walked away from it. But it's all speculation, I think. There was no way of knowing, and I'm glad we didn't take it to the wire.
Yeah, and Keith, I'd like to come back to you now. And I think we were talking before the call started, and I made a comment. I think, to put it in context for people who can't remember it, or, a lot of Reading fans weren't even born back in 1983. But it was, in a way, it was quite similar to the recent protest. Well, I say recent, wasn't that recently, but the Super League protest, wasn't it, Keith, I think?
Yeah, it was very similar in that respect. Yeah, I mean, obviously, an awful lot of people went on that march, so an awful lot of people felt very strongly about it, which is probably the same as a Super League, really. Nobody wanted it. The Oxford fans didn't want it. We didn't want it. And it was just a complete disaster waiting to happen, really. I mean, on my banner, I basically said on there that I called them Didcot Disunited, with a lucky if they get 150 crowd, which they probably would have done. I mean, nobody would have wanted to see a team that was half Oxford, half Reading from either side, and to go and see them at Didcot. I mean, well, I wouldn't have gone, that's for sure, and I know an awful lot of my friends wouldn't have done. And I was friends with some of the best supporters at the club, because obviously working in the shop, I worked with Colin Bishop and, people like that are still around at the club. And, I'm sure that they would not have wanted to see a team that was just a non-entity, really. They had no identity. No, it couldn't happen. And I think, the march said everything about that, and I think whether or not it would have affected the outcome without the work of people like Trance, I don't know, but it just, at least it showed everyone how we felt, but really, when it comes down to it, obviously people like Brooks and Trant and Smee are the people that really made it happen, and thank God they did.
Yeah, and Rodney, I'd like to come back to you now. There was obviously the fan protest in Reading, and there's that famous picture, and I put it on social media, and a lot of Reading fans have said, "Oh, that's me in the picture just there," and it was a bit like the opposite of the celebrations you get when you win a league, except they're coming out to protest about, their club potentially going out of existence. What do you remember, Rodney, about the fan protest?
Well, I wasn't living in Reading at the time, although I was there for every match. I think the crazy things that were going on was it was suggested at one stage that if initially the club would play one home match at Oxford and the next home match at Reading and then back again. And you mentioned about Maxwell looking for a site in Oxford. He played hardball with the city council, who did eventually offer him a £6 million sports centre development down at Botley, but he was committed to Didcot or Wallingford or somewhere in that area. And his aim was to sell off both grounds, obviously. And I mean, that was horrendous. I was 40 at the time, and you know, reading the newspapers and talking to people living locally. It was horror. You just couldn't believe it. I mean, if they turned around and said, well, okay, we're going to merge Arsenal and Chelsea and have a ground somewhere between the two. I mean, it's to us, although you know, 3 divisions apart, that was irrelevant to us. Reading was just as important as Arsenal or Tottenham or anybody else. And you know, we followed them for years and years, talking to all the supporters. And it was ironic, really, that there were more people on the march protesting than there were turning up for home games.
Yeah.
When you look back at, I mean, we were fighting against relegation. Here we go again. But we were playing in front of 2,000 people on a good day, and on pitches that were atrocious, with a hard, wet leather ball, and you know, it just didn't seem. Surely this can't happen. Not to our club. You know, people like my family who supported the club for years and years and years, just couldn't believe, and it was, you know, a topic of conversation all round. And even though I was living down in Guildford at the time, part of the time, people were still asking me what the hell is going on. You know, we've got 2 well-established clubs, both practically bankrupt, admittedly, and someone is talking about throwing them into a mix. No way.
And John, coming back to you now, what can you remember about the fan protest? Because I know you've been a fan of Reading since the 70s, haven't you? So yep. what do you remember about the actual the fan protest?
Just really joining the crowd outside what was the Butt Centre then, going along the Oxford Road and turning left. So, I mean, to be honest, I was 21. I'd been married for the first time just under 4 weeks earlier. So I let other people organise it. I was just one to make the numbers up there, but it was an interesting experience. But I think it's important to put into context the state that football was in at the time, because I mean, Reading was clearly a basket case, losing so much money. Elm Park was falling down. Racism was rife. I mean, people look back and say, you know, the atmosphere at Elm Park was brilliant. Not when you had 2,000 people there. It didn't. There were some dire days there, and hooliganism was hanging over the game all the time. So really, it was in a bad way, and something had to change. And you know, this was the catalyst to push Reading on. But it's something that had to happen one way or another to change it. Yeah, and I mean, we in some ways we owe Maxwell a favour for making that happen, but it was a damn close run thing.
And Johnny, I'll come to you now because I know you've got to jump off. I think I said at the start of the call, you're often having to double up as a co-host and childcare at the same time, so you've got to put your little ones to bed. I know. So, what do you, Johnny? Just asking you, what do you think that Reading and the Reading fans owe to Roger Smee?
Oh, we wouldn't be here now without him, and all those people that were involved. Like, you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, people have short memories, and you know, we're struggling at the minute. You know, the scary part of, you know, not having a club is horrific. You know, we support the team through thick and thin, through bottom of the league, top of the league, whatever. We get the good stuff, we get the bad stuff. But when it's in your, you know, it's in your blood, and you know, you're born there, or you whatever it is, why Reading's part of your family in your life. Somebody takes that away from you, it's horrific. it's not just about the football. It's about the community. It's about your friends. It's about the club. It's about togetherness. It's about helping. We could go on, but the fact that somebody decides that they can take that away from you, and you don't have a say, is horrible. It was that close, wasn't it? I know, the other guys were there and involved in the protests. I was only, youngster with, reading what was going on, but that was unpleasant, and it felt real, and it felt like you're on the edge, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and that's like for fans now that's what it was like. It's like the fear of relegation. This is the fear of losing your club.
Yeah, and Keith, I just wanted, well, Johnny, we'll let you go now because I know you've got after the kids, but thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I might come back on if I get one to set with about 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, I remember those days, so good luck with that. But we might
Cheers,
see you
guys.
before it finishes. But Keith, I'll come to you now. Pretty much the whole of Reading got behind Roger Smee and this bid to block the merger, didn't they?
They certainly did. Yeah. It was something that it really got everybody in the town going. I think even people that weren't interested in football, I was speaking to, they said, that can't happen. We can't lose our football club. Because at the end of the day, even if you're not a football fan, people still associate towns with football clubs. And even though ours isn't the biggest, that's still the case.
Yeah. And John, I want to come back to you now. This has been mentioned already, and for any Reading fans who don't remember Robert Maxwell, what do you remember about him? Because it's fair to say that he wasn't really that well liked, was he?
You could say that. I don't think people knew much about him until this happened, and then he was a universal hate figure. It's clear that he didn't understand football in the slightest. He thought that people would just change a football club like they change a supermarket. But you can change your job, your car, even your wife, your house, whatever. You never change your football club. It's with you for life. And that's just what he didn't realise about fans and the nature of supporters. But no, he's it was really the first time I heard of him. And then obviously followed his career like everybody else after that, where it came to a wet end.
Yeah. And John, also, when it finally broke the news that the merger had been stopped, it wasn't going ahead, we were keeping Reading Football Club. How did you feel? Was it a sense of relief or?
Absolutely brilliant. Yes. Just back to business as usual, but with the new chairman and some hope, because under Waller the club was clearly just slowly dying. And it was a double-edged sword that we went through this, but it actually rescued us. So there was hope, not just that this had been quashed, but we had a new chairman, a bit of investment, a way forward, and we had to sell Kerry Dixon, which was a tragedy, but we replaced him with Trevor Senior. So that was the best replacement we could have got. So yes, it was really just a new dawn. I can't put it any other way. It was just a new start.
And same question for Keith and Rodney and also yourself, Ewan. So Keith first, how did you feel when you finally heard the news that the merger wasn't going ahead?
Wow, I couldn't have been more delighted, obviously. I agree with what John said. It was just relief. I can't imagine, losing my football club. I first went over there when I was 5 years old to Elm Parks. My dad used to work in the Spread Eagle. And so 1957 was my first game, and I started going down there in the early 60s on my own. And I just cannot imagine not having that. I'm still a season ticket holder now. And, I can't imagine losing a football club. It is a part of your life, and it always will be.
Yeah. And same question for you, Rodney. The news comes out, it's not happening. How are you feeling?
Well, having grown up in Oxford, Maxwell was known to us because of his investment in Oxford in publishing. And then he bought Oxford United. And he wasn't popular then, and this certainly didn't do anything to raise his popularity. I mean, you had this crazy situation that suddenly you had a new potential of a new club with 45 players. What on earth are they going to do with them? And as I say, the hate grew in Oxford just as it did in Reading. And it's strange because living up in Shropshire, I'm now campaigning to try and get on the local councils. And because I wear my Reading fleece, the number of people that have asked me, even now, weren't you involved with the Maxwell business? And you know, it still rumbles around. You still get people that remember. You may not be ardent football fans, but it had such a wide repercussion right throughout the whole community, both in Oxford and in Reading. But it seems to have permeated right across the football world, I think.
I'll come back to you now, Ewan, if that's okay. Obviously, you were very young back in those days, but what do you think you would have done if the merger had gone ahead? Would you have started supporting Thames Valley Royals, or what do you think?
Yeah, no way. It would have been unconceivable to think of anything, having lived just down from the club and Elm Park, and the feeling of when you're walking by that stadium and hearing the roar of the crowd when the goals used to go in. So it was just a relief when, Roger Mee and his team, won the day, really, from, the previous, because it was, for want of a better word, grey men in suits running the club, too old, not any direction. And it was a pity because Maurice Evans, we lost him to Oxford, and he went on to win the League Cup with them, with Ray Houghton, who scored the goal. And, we were watching on, seeing Oxford then doing well, and we were being relegated, and, we got promoted again. And things were looking up under Roger Smee, and, him being an ex-player as well, chairing the club, it all seemed to be moving forward in a better direction, and we kind of overtook Oxford then at times. So it's just relief that we've moved on, and Maxwell was that catalyst to go, like, this is a prime target for a takeover to destroy this club. And he got short shrift and told where to go.
Yeah.
We've had some really great years since then, whereas Oxford had faded in the background and struggled. Maybe coming back, but
I'm not sure they've still, because they've only got 3 sides of their ground. I think that still might be.
But we've got a lot more history now, and so much more success because of those guys working hard.
But even from their point of view as well, they didn't want it to happen, and I'm sure the Oxford fans who have been Oxford fans for 40 years plus still feel the same, even though they are where they are now, and maybe they'll sort of come back up at some point. But look, Roger Smee, he became chairman, and the following season, Reading, as they still were, they won promotion back to Division 3 with Trevor Sini. He scored 41 goals that season. Amazing season. Coming so soon after what happened in 1983. So, John, I just want to ask you, what was it like that season, knowing that you could actually still be a Reading fan?
Just brilliant. It was like night and day from the previous dire, half-empty relegation season. Suddenly there was a bit of colour and a bit of optimism. As I say, it was a new dawn. Trevor Senior, I mean, was it something like 3 goals in the first 6 minutes of his debut against Stockport?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was. So, and there we never looked back. It was just a brilliant season to be involved in, and it just like night and day compared with the beforehand. Although there is one highlight as well of that season that probably more than the March sticks in my brain: the away match at Oxford at the beginning of May. So only about 3 or 4 games after it was all announced. Clearly there was so much needle in that, and we went and beat them 2-0. So I still remember the satisfaction of that cold, wet evening
Yeah, and as a Reading fan, John, looking back now, how do you feel about what Roger Smee and everyone else involved did to stop the merger from happening?
I mean, it's strange because I mean, for many years I've been involved in supporter activism, and this was the start of it. And I suppose in some ways, being on that march eventually led me to be vice chair of the Football Supporters Federation for 5 years. But I'm conscious of the fact that the supporters marching, in the end, it meant nothing. It was the diligence and the legal brain of Roy Tranter and the others who actually stopped it. So it was free men and lawyers who stopped it. Just with so much else, the views of the supporters, obvious as they were just completely irrelevant to everybody.
But it also showed, I think it went to show, as you saw, the Super League protests, it went to show what the strength of the feeling was. So in that way, it kind of just supported everything else that was going on. And what about yourself, Keith? Looking back, it's 40 years ago now that happened. Reading were in danger of not just getting relegation, but going out of existence. How do you feel about the people who saved the club, basically?
Well, obviously we're indebted to them, and we always will be. And as it happens, Simon, my best friend, who worked in the shop with us, was a guy who carried the banner with me in the march. He subsequently went on to be a vice president, and he still is a vice president. And obviously Roy was a vice president. So we came to be very good friends with Roy. And it was, wow, I would go as far as to say it was an honor to be a friend of Roy. And, I mean, I'll never forget him. He was one of the great guys and a true gentleman. In every sense of the word, and I never forget that bone-crushing handshake that you got every time you met him. He was a lovely guy, and yeah, we owe him everything.
And same question to you, really, Rodney. Looking back now, all these years later, what do you think about the strength of Roger Smee and the team of people around him? It sort of went to prove that if you want something enough, and you do things in the right way, you can make it happen. What do you think that Roger Smee and everyone else that was involved stopping that? What do you think that really meant and still means to Reading now?
I think it meant everything. The fact that we were so fortunate twice with Tranter and Smee, and then with Sir John, both separate occasions, but picking us up out of the mire and leading us forward. And I think to those sorts of people that understood what was happening and were in a position to actually do something about it and give us a club that we could be proud of and could love and could go forward with. And I think the question is now, where's the next one going to come from? But that's perhaps a question for another day. But no, it just means everything. As I say, my family supported me since 1900. I've done 70 odd years. And my son has done 20. My grandson is waiting to come. And it's there. It's our life. It's, what is it they say? You can take a man out of Reading, but you can't take Reading out of a man.
Yeah, and I'm pleased to say that Johnny's joined us, so I'm going to leave the final question to him. But before that, Union, I'd like to come to you. Perhaps for the younger Reading fans who remember the 106 season, remember Brian McDermott's team going up to the Premier League, even going back to the 90s team under Mark McGee that won promotion and nearly got up to the Premier League, but don't remember as far back as 83. How important and how significant was what happened in 1983 to the whole history of and existence of the club? I mean, what do you think the newer fans should know and understand about that time?
Well, it was probably the number one event before the age of the internet. It was voted Reading World's number one event in about 2001. That it was the most important event in the Royals' history, in around that time, 2001. Obviously, there's events being taken over since then. Perhaps would it be interesting to know what is the top 20 nowadays? But for a young fan going through, it's the same thing, isn't it? Just imagine if Southampton and Reading, some more guild felt we need to get into the top 6 or a Super League of Europe in order to compete. We're going to do that now. We're going to merge the teams and have them based in, just south of Basingstoke. There'd be the same issue. It would be inconceivable, but it would still be a real danger that it could happen.
Yeah, and Johnny, I'm going to finish off with you because you've done your childcare duties. So welcome back. Going to give you the last question. Just kind of sum up really what those events in 1983, 40 years ago, meant for the future of Reading Football Club and everything that's happened since then. The 106 season and Steve Coppell and John Medeski and everything else that's happened in the more recent years. How important was were the events of April 1983?
I don't even think you can put it into words. In the real terms now of football, like somebody says your club's going to finish tomorrow, you're going to go and join, like you say, Southampton or whatever, or you support your team. You don't support someone else's. And like that to have that taken away from you because someone's greedy and wants to take over the world, and you don't have a say in it, and it's not your choice and it's not your doing. And it's not about the players, the manager. It's about you guys saying you've got family that goes back however long that have supported a club. We're 1871. There's a reason for that. That's our history. That's that. Whatever the results on the pitch, whatever happens with the team, whatever happens this season, it's our club, and it always will be. And if somebody says to you, you can't have that anymore, you go, sorry. How dare you? Like it's just not. It's just something like younger fans, like you say, wouldn't even consider that. They could complain about owners, and we've had a few of those recently, and the management and whatever else. But at least we still got our club. That 40 years ago, that was actually a scary, not an option. So you kind of go, not be thankful for it, you're grateful in a patronising way, but geez, we're still here, and we couldn't have been.
And I think you summed it up there, really. I mean, we're all still a bit worried about are Reading going to stay up this season? But 40 years ago today, we were worried about if we'd still have a club to support, because I think the general consensus is that we don't really want to be supporting an amalgamation of Oxford United and Reading in Didcot. So I think the analogy of, modern day equivalent of that would be merging Southampton with Reading or something like that. But, that sounds like a strange idea and a strange thing to say, but that's how it was back in those days. So we owe the existence of Reading Football Club and all the success that we've enjoyed since then to Roger Smee and everyone that was involved back then. So a thank you to them, really, on behalf of all Reading fans. So look, that's it for this episode to mark the 40th anniversary of the proposed merger. Thankfully, it didn't happen, and we can look forward to the future as Reading fans, and let's see what happens for the rest of the season. That's it for now. So thank you to Johnny, my co-host, and to our guests, John, Keith, Rodney, and Ewan.